The government is expanding free childcare in England with up to 6,000 new school-based nursery places set to be on offer.
But there's concern that boosting nursery places in primary schools will not be enough to meet what is an ever-increasing demand. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson joins us now. Plenty to talk about, Bridget Phillipson. But firstly, what will change for parents this morning of nursery-aged children?
Today I'm setting out our plans for 300 new or expanded school-based nurseries. So that will create 4,000 places for September and 6,000 overall. That will make a really big difference to parents at the start of the day. I'd said that early years was my #1 priority, and I meant it. And that's where we make the biggest difference to children's life chances. And I visited one of the schools that will be expanding their nursery as a part of this scheme. On Monday, I met with Hannah, a mum who was dropping off her little boy Niall, and she told me what a big difference it had made in terms of his speech, his development, and how she felt he'd come on leaps and bounds. And she had 2 older children at the school, so on top of that, it was really convenient for her.
OK, I want to ask you about something else that's happening at primary schools, and this is the story of the parents who had police called on them by a primary school. 6 police officers in Hertfordshire turn up at the doorstep of these 2 parents simply because they had complained about something at the primary school. Now, that might have sent a chill through lots of primary school or indeed any school parents. What did you make of that fact? We know that there was no case to answer. Despite the fact that they were held in a police cell for 8 hours, they weren't charged with anything. As the Education Secretary, is this an appropriate response to a complaint made about your child's school?
So I think there's 2 elements to this. Firstly, in terms of the police response, that's for the police to respond to. They are operationally independent. It's not for politicians to get involved in commenting on action that the police do or don't take, and they can speak for themselves in terms of their response. Around the question about complaints to schools, relationships between parents and schools, it is important that parents are able to complain to their child's school where they're unhappy with an aspect of education or what might be going on within the school, and that is an important principle. Alongside that, however, I do hear quite a lot from school leaders that we see overlapping complaints, so where sometimes complaints might be made through a number of different routes, and that can generate quite a lot of work for the schools. So I think
a lot of work, but it does. I appreciate that, and they're under a lot of pressure, schools, as we know. But calling the police simply because there is a large volume of emails doesn't seem an appropriate response. In fact, the police eventually dropped there was no case. What is happening in our schools that instead of mediation, instead of calling the parents, instead of talking to the education department, they're calling the police?
Look, I know what I've read through the press, but it's for the individual school and for the individual police force really to respond in terms of the action they've taken.
As Education Secretary, whether you might take a greater interest in this, because I think I would be extremely concerned that a school had decided police action was necessary when there was no case to answer.
I do take a wider interest in kind of what you've just been describing there about the relationship between schools and families, which has become increasingly fraught. And I think this is the kind of thing that we're seeing more and more in terms of a breakdown in the relationship between families and schools. And I also hear from schools that they can sometimes face quite a big volume of overlapping complaints where parents might be making the same complaint through a number of routes. So we are looking at this as a government because in an ideal world, you don't get to this situation where other people get involved, not least the police. You have a situation where families and schools are able to resolve issues that they're facing in a much more calm and reasonable and measured manner. But sadly, and short of the kind of escalation that we've seen here, I have seen a lot more in recent times of that all becoming just a bit more fraught. And I don't think it really serves anyone's interest to end up with parents and schools at loggerheads.
Can I ask you about another aspect of relationships between schools, parents, society, which you will have an interest in? You will know, talking to teachers and parents, we get this all the time, concerns about the use of mobile phones by teenagers, accessing dangerous information online, online porn and the impact on girls and young women. This is an area where we need to do more, don't we, to keep our children safe, whether that's regulation or parents or schools. We need to do more.
Yes, I totally agree. We do need to do more. I think there's two key elements to this. So firstly, there's what happens within our schools. And if we're talking specifically about access to smartphones during the school day, you know, phones have got no place in the classroom. School leaders and teachers have got the powers they need. If they see phones, to take them off kids. That's absolutely what they should be doing. And they've got my full backing in doing that. But obviously, it's what children can often access when they're not in school. We can control access to technology during the school day, but what happens after the school day is what I think causes parents the greatest concern. It's why we are taking action through the Online Safety Act to take down some of that hate-filled content. But I think there is a wider question in terms of how we prepare our children and young people for the world to come. Really important questions around what healthy relationship looks like, so that teenagers in particular understand in an age-appropriate way key areas like what consent is. I think for our young boys, making sure that they've got really strong positive role models. I've seen some brilliant examples in schools where older boys within the school are mentoring younger boys, so providing those role models, that positive demonstration of what it is to be a young man in today's society. And I think seeking to do that in a positive way, not in a negative way.
You will know that Elon Musk, the owner of X, has refused to take down dangerous online content. We now read the Prime Minister Keir Starmer is negotiating a reduction in regulation for the tech companies in return for potentially a deal on tariffs. If you're the business secretary, you might think that's a good deal for cars. If you're the education secretary who wants more action, more regulation to protect children and parents, are you saying to the Prime Minister, be careful, don't sell down the river our young people for a trade deal?
There is agreement across government, including the Prime Minister, that we do need to act to make sure that we take down some of that illegal content, often which can involve, frankly, terrorist material as well. That is incredibly important.
Refusing to do that, and he's advising Donald Trump.
Yes, and we continue as a government to work to ensure that that happens. That work is going on across government. There is agreement on that. It is important.
Keir Starmer is negotiating a deal to reduce regulation, he's not actually going to negotiate a deal which will reduce that regulation.
Any deal will be in Britain's national interest. That's the assurance I can absolutely give you, and that does involve making sure that material that can get in the hands of people can be a contributory factor to some very, very serious things happening here in our country. We absolutely will retain the power to take that, to make sure that action is taken to take that down.
To put our children at risk in order to get a trade deal on tariffs?
Absolutely, we want to make sure that our children and young people are safe. This obviously goes beyond our children and young people too, because we're sometimes talking in certain cases about material and content that is illegal and that is accessed by adults, by those with malign intent. Alongside that, any deal that is negotiated will absolutely be in Britain's national interest.
That is very, very clear. Just want to make sure that the negotiators are listening to the Education Secretary. But thank you very much indeed for being so clear with us this morning. It's appreciated.